All right, God bless everybody. Today our topic is our resurrection realization. What is it going to take to get them to realize that He has been raised from the dead? What's He going to have to do? The resurrection of Jesus Christ is probably the most pivotal point in all of human history. He'd been preparing his mind for his death and resurrection his entire life, but his apostles hadn't. His followers hadn't. The problem now was getting his most faithful followers to believe that he actually rose from the dead. The resurrection would be a waste of time if no one believed that he rose from the dead. What would it have accomplished? Jesus had even told his disciples that some people are so hard-headed, so resistant to the truth, so thick, so recalcitrant, that even if somebody were to rise from the dead, they still wouldn't believe. Luke 16:31. And he would find this to be true this day. And we're going to cover basically mostly the day that he rose from the dead. And the day he first arose, he appeared 5 times in 5 different places. He ate 2 meals, and he took on at least 4 different looks. He looked like a gardener, a traveler, his old vibrant self, and his final appearance that first day, he appeared in a room looking much like he did when he was hanging on that tree. When he was spiked to that tree. And you wonder why the apostles screamed like little schoolgirls when he appeared that 5th time. So without a belief in the resurrection, there would be no new birth. There'd be no Christianity. There'd be no United States. And there'd be no you. You know, getting that group of people to believe that he rose from the dead was Jesus' most important task on this most amazing day and the 39 days following. And it's still his mission. He's still trying to do the same type of thing. People have to believe that he rose from the dead, or there's no power. There's nothing there for them, really. So we're going to see that there's 12 resurrection appearances listed in the Word of God. 5 happened on that first day. 4 others are easy to pinpoint over the following 39 days leading up to the ascension, and 2 can't be time framed. And the final recorded resurrection realization took place in a couple of years maybe after, and it was by one of the most unlikely people to receive. See, the risen Christ is still risen, he's still working, he's still eating, he's still doing whatever he can do to help you and others believe. Everything we believe hinges on our resurrection realization. So, when was your resurrection realization? I mean, do you even know? You know, most Americans don't have any clue as to when they got born again, because it could have been when they were a kid. We've talked about the Christ, we've heard about it most of our lives. So it's hard to pinpoint. Now you can determine the day that you understood it, and you can determine the day that you committed yourself. But it might be hard to figure out exactly when you first believed that Jesus rose from the dead. So now the run-up to the resurrection. He'd spent a full year traveling Israel and teaching and healing, loving, fulfilling prophecy after prophecy. He chose his 12 disciples, but many others followed him. All Israel was abuzz about this Jesus fellow. The religious people rewarded his love and dedication to the truth with the death sentence. Now, not much has changed. He'd been they beat him beyond recognition. Some of his bones were visible. His skin had been peeled off in many places with vicious lashes from a whip. His lips were split. A crown of thorns had been pounded into his scalp. He barely looked like a man anymore. They stripped him naked, spiked him to a bloody wooden post, and they set him in a most visible spot just outside the city gate, surrounded by 4 convicts. He hung there writhing in pain, joints dislocated, listening to curses and insults from passers-by, and from three of the four felons that were staked next to him. 6 or 7 women, including his mom hung in there with him while he hung there. His apostles were nowhere to be seen, at least for now. Now, I'm not sure if that was by purpose or design, or if they were just scared. Don't know. After 6 hours, the skies turned black. A chill breeze kicked up, and he sang his theme song, Psalm 22, through swollen lips, and ended it loudly with the phrase, "It is finished." And this was punctuated by a timely earthquake that shook the walls of an ungrateful city. For now he'd done everything he could have possibly done to get people to believe in God from a clear and fresh perspective. Now he needed his guys, his apostles, his followers to believe that he was going to rise from the dead. He fully believed that he was going to rise up from the dead in 3 days' time. He had hope. He needed his faithful to believe with that same conviction, but they didn't. They didn't. It took almost 40 days for them to believe. Within a matter of hours, he'd been buried twice in the same borrowed grave. He lay motionless for 3 days and 3 nights, guarded by 4 Roman soldiers. Contrary to popular belief, he was buried on Wednesday evening and lay there for a full 72 hours. Then on Saturday evening, just as the full Passover moon became noticeable, an angel streaked down from heaven, rolled back the stone, scaring the pee-willy out of the Roman soldiers. They passed out and later fled when they woke back up. Jesus was raised from the dead. He percolated through the grave wrappings that were smeared and saturated with about 75 pounds of wonderful smelling grease and ointment called aloes and myrrh. He was up. He was free. But his real work was just about to begin. Now all he had to do, all Jesus needed to do now, was to get his faithful followers, his apostles, his disciples, his believers, all they had to do was believe that he rose from the dead. That doesn't seem so hard, does it? Should be easy. Should be a piece of cake, right? I don't think so. Resurrection realizations. Once it started getting dark that Saturday evening, the women who had followed him for the past weeks came to the grave. And there was Mary Magdalene, the other Mary, the wife of Cleopas, which we heard about a couple of weeks ago. There was Joanna and Salome and a couple of others. 2 of these women had sons who were Jesus' apostles. They had a stake in this thing. Their sons had given up their lives to travel with this Jesus guy for a year, and these women had traveled as much as they could as well. Now they got to the grave and they saw that the stone had been moved. Imagine if you went to visit a loved one's grave and it was dug up. See, one angel spoke to the ladies and told them that if they're looking for this Jesus who was crucified, that he's risen. And then he said, go tell the disciples to meet Jesus in Galilee. And you can find those in Matthew 28, 5 through 7, Mark 16, 4 through 7, and Luke 24, 3 through 7. So now these women leave, and they run and tell the disciples who are in this room. They still think his body was stolen, even after what the angel told them. And Peter and another disciple, they run to that grave to go check out what the women said. And they see that the stone's been rolled. And the ladies try to keep up with him, but they couldn't keep up with the 2 men. Peter steps right into the grave, into that tomb, and he sees the hollow shell of grave wrappings. It was sort of like a mummy with no mummy in there, like a cocoon, just sitting there, empty. But it smelled wonderful. And the younger man believed at that point, and he never even saw anything. But Peter didn't. Peter didn't. They didn't see an angel, nor did they see Jesus appear. They just go back now. And that's in John 20, verse 3 through 10. Then they leave, and when they leave, Mary was leaning right up. She's right at the side of that sepulcher, at that tomb. And then she's just she's alone now. And now remember, she was probably much younger than those other ladies. They were probably her mother's age. Okay, so she hot-footed it back there. She got there before the other ladies did. That's Mark 16:9. Now the first resurrection appearance, Mary Magdalene. This woman had to be something. Mary Magdalene had to be something. Because this is the first person Jesus decided he was going to appear to. It wasn't Peter, wasn't the apostles, wasn't the religious leaders, wasn't his mom. Certainly it should have been his mom, but it wasn't. Peter and the other guy, they left. Mary's now standing outside the tomb crying her eyes out. And even though two angels tell her he's risen, there was two guys sitting in there. One at one side of the grave wrappings, one at the other side, one at the head, one at the foot. It was a hollow shell. Peter and them didn't see those guys because they weren't there until Mary, because God wanted her to see this. She's crying her eyes out. You know, they tell her he's risen. She still thinks the body was moved somewhere else after two angels told her it was risen. John 20, verse 11. Now we're going to start reading. I'm going to read this from the Voice. John 20, verse 11. Mary, however, stood outside the tomb sobbing, crying, and kneeling at its entrance. As she cried, two heavenly messengers appeared before her, sitting where Jesus' head and feet had been laid. Heavenly messengers. Dear woman, why are you weeping? Mary Magdalene. They've taken away my Lord, and I cannot find him. After uttering these words, she turned around to see Jesus standing before her, but she did not recognize him. Jesus, dear woman, why are you sobbing? You know, who is it that you're looking for? And she still had no idea who it was before her, thinking he was the gardener. See, he probably had on one of those gardener hats, you know, and he had on a shirt with his name emblazoned on it, the dude, you know, and then he had his little work belt on with one of those leather holsters to hold those orange-handled pruners that you see. You know, and he probably had a little rake over in one hand, and he just stand there. What are you doing, lady? Why are you crying? He said, where? So here's what she says. She said, tell me where he is, and I will retrieve him. Now she's talking to whom? Jesus. And then Jesus says, Mary. You know, in just the way that he would have talked to her. Mary, Mary, Mary. You know, however he would have said it. It would have been happy and joyful, exuberant. And Mary Magdalene turning to Jesus and speaking in Hebrew, Rabboni, my teacher. She realized it. That was her resurrection realization. The first person Jesus came to see in his newly resurrected body was Mary Magdalene. This was a woman, a super faithful woman who had traveled with his men, and he had once delivered her of many devil spirits. This woman had had troubles, but to her, he looked like a gardener at that time. You know, I mean, so, you know, it's wild, but when she realized who it was, imagine how she felt inside. Imagine. You see, Jesus was just having fun in his new body. Look what I can do. You know? You know, you think we're going to have some fun in our new bodies? It's going to be just like his. Number 2, resurrection realization, the women. Now it's all the women, including Mary. The other women showed up a few heartbeats after she had just seen the angels and just seen this Jesus. And before Mary Maggs could tell them what had happened, Jesus appears again. And this time he looked like the old vivacious self, the pre-crucified version of Jesus Christ. Like he did when they were traveling together. He looked good. Jesus appeared. He spread out his arms and says to these amazing ladies, cheers! or be happy, or rejoice, I'm up. Matthew 28, verse 9 and 10. But while they were on their way, they saw Jesus himself. So they were all heading somewhere together. They were heading probably back to where the apostles were, and then he appears. They saw Jesus himself. So now he's in another form here, right? You see? And Jesus greeting the women, he said, rejoice, or cheers. And the women fell down before him, kissing his feet and worshiping him. Probably not a very unusual thing to do, given the situation. Now, Jesus, don't be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. Tell them I will meet them there. So where did Jesus want them to meet him? In Galilee. Okay, now these ladies flat out loved Jesus. Now most were Jesus' mom's age. They probably mothered him a little bit. You know, they supported him. They took care of him, just like his mom did. It took a lot of people to take care of all those apostles for a year. They didn't work for a year. Notice how he tells them to go tell the disciples to go to Galilee. And that's where he's going to meet them. Now, if it were only that easy. Now there's some transitions that happen in between appearances. Now the guards now, they go and tell the high priest what had happened, and the religious leaders paid them off with big money to keep their mouths shut about the angel and the resurrection, and to simply say that his disciples stole Jesus while they were sleeping. Now notice how they didn't go tell their commanding officer. These were Roman soldiers, okay? And they went and told the religious leaders. Why? Well, there's a good reason. Roman soldiers, if they lost a prisoner, it was a death sentence for them. Or at very worst, a prison sentence. And to fall asleep on your post, that could certainly mean death. Okay? But the religious guys told them to say that they were asleep and the disciples stole them. So those are two no-nos for soldiers. See, but these guys, and everybody knew that the religious leaders knew exactly how to manipulate the Romans. So that's why they went to them. Plus they might get a little scratch, might get a little jingle, might get a little coin. So the women all race back to where the disciples are staying and try to get them to believe that they saw angels. Now, if you saw an angel, would you tell everybody you knew? Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Now, if you saw the resurrected Christ, you'd go and tell more than everybody you knew. Well, that's what these women, they're going back to the only people they really trust there. And they go back and they tell them that they saw angels and they saw the resurrected Jesus. And the men thought they were just the silly tales of emotional women. Luke 24, 9 through 12 from the Message. And they left the tomb and broke the news of all this to the 11 and the rest. Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them kept telling these things to the apostles. But the apostles didn't believe a word of it. They thought they were making it all up. But Peter jumped to his feet, ran to the tomb, stooped in, looked, saw a few grave clothes, and then he walked away puzzled, shaking his head. Peter went back a second time after this. And they kept trying to tell him. The women just couldn't get through those men's thick heads. Now, I know men aren't usually like that, you see, but these guys were, okay? It was an anomaly, okay? Now, none of the men and none of the apostles yet believe that Jesus rose from the dead. None of them do. And so, what now? Jesus now had to find a way to get them to believe. He had to find a way to get them to believe. Now, number 3, resurrection realization. And Cleopas and Mary from Emmaus. Now, we discovered a couple of weeks ago that the two men on the road to Emmaus weren't two men at all. It was a man and his wife, a man named Cleopas and his wife named Mary. Okay, and this third realization happened just as the sun was going down on Sunday. Jesus had been up almost 24 hours, and only the women believed that he had risen from the dead so far. He needed the apostles to believe. They had to believe, or his work would be in vain. Believing in the resurrected Christ is how people get born again, isn't it? You have to believe it. You got to have a resurrection, but with no belief, there's not much there. Not a single man believed, except for maybe that young man who had raced with Paul to the grave, and it said that he believed, and he never saw. We don't know who that guy was. He's probably somebody in that room. And Cleopas had been hanging out with the apostles all day. His wife Mary had traveled with Jesus the past few weeks. Their son was one of the apostles named James, or James the Less. You see, this guy Cleopas, he'd heard all he could hear from his wife now. He couldn't stomach anything else from his women. It's already been a crazy day. I mean, this guy they had seen Jesus get beat to a pulp. They'd seen him get buried. And then they knew there was guards at his grave. And then now these ladies are coming back saying they saw angels and they saw the resurrected Jesus. And they're like, I don't think so. Not gonna happen. You see? And he heard all he could hear. These crazy ladies. You know, these crazy ladies. I got to get my lady out of here. So he grabbed his little rolling suitcase, you know, and grabbed his wife's arm, and they started walking home. They lived 7 miles from there in a town called Emmaus. And so they're walking along, and she's probably if you were there, wouldn't you still try to convince him? Would you be a little peeved at your husband at that point? Probably not. Not you ladies. You know, but his wife, Mary, had been trying to get him and the others to believe that she and the other ladies had actually seen, heard, and even touched the resurrected Christ. He just couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe what they said. It was time to go home to Emmaus. So they left. Makes sense. Okay. He just couldn't handle any more drama. Let's just get out of here. And at some point on that 2-hour stroll back to Emmaus, a traveler walked up to them and struck up a conversation. Now, what does a traveler look like? In those days, they don't know, but you sure can't tell if somebody's a tourist when they're in town, can't you? Well, that's what he looked like to them. If he was German, he would have had a fanny pack, you know? You know, he would have had one of those, you know, if he's American, he would have had a ball cap, right? If he's American, he would have had a baseball cap, you know, pulled down, you know, flat bill, you know, nowadays, favorite team on the top, you see. You know, he probably would have had a backpack, you know, some kind of backpack carrying things. Would have had a water bottle, right? Okay, would have had his water bottle somewhere, carrying it or something, you see. You know, might have had a little walking stick. You see, would have been rolling his little wheeled bag or something, you see. So he's a traveler. He looked like a traveler. He didn't look like Jesus. So now this is the third form, right, that we've noticed. And so here they are. So this traveler walks up and strikes up a conversation with them. Luke 24, verse 17. And he asked, what's this you're discussing so intently as you walk? I like that, intently. And that was probably Mary. Come on, Cleopas. Get it through your thick head. She's slapping him up beside the back of his head. You know, come on, man. You know, what is going on here? And he's going, woman, I've heard just about enough. Of course, I don't want to carry on a dialogue I don't know, but it was an intense conversation, okay? All you guys who are married have had maybe one or two of those, you see. And they just stood there. They stopped, long-faced, like they'd lost their best friend. And one of them, his name was Cleopas, said, are you the only one in Jerusalem who hasn't heard what happened in these last few days? Jesus said, "What has happened?" I love it. I love how he messes with people. You know, I mean, because that's what people do, right? If you could change forms, you would do some stuff. I guarantee you would. You'd mess your kids' heads up. Cleopas tells Jesus, who doesn't look like Jesus, the story of Jesus. He took it like, he told a whole long story. Then he talked about the torture, the crucifixion, the burials, and then the tall tales that these women and others are saying, oh my gosh, about angels and him raising from the dead, oh my word. Luke 24:25. Then he said unto them, this is Jesus, so thick-headed, so slow-hearted, why can't you simply believe all that the prophets have said? Don't you see that these things had to happen? That the Messiah had to suffer and only then enter into his glory? Then he started at the beginning with the books of Moses, and went on through all the prophets, pointing out everything in the scriptures that referred to him. Cleopas and Mary get close to their house and begin to head inside. Jesus keeps walking, shrugs his backpack a little bit, and he just keeps on like he's going to keep walking. You see, like he's on a mission, like he's heading somewhere, like he's a traveler. And they ask him to stop and eat with them. He goes, nah, I need to get going. Come on in, man. No. I'm in a hurry. Yeah, come on, please, man. She makes the best bread in town. You know, and she goes, I do. I do. And it's gluten-free, you see. And so he goes in, you know, he goes in. They still don't know it's him. So Mary, there's always a fire going in those houses in those days. And they always had like a rock or some kind of a metal pan or something on there. And they kept the fire going all the time because they didn't have stoves that you turn on and off. So they would have stoked it before they left. There's some coals. She got it going again. She baked a little bit of the bread, the flat bread. You know, she made a couple, sort of like tortillas or something like you might have, or like pita bread. You know, and you've all seen that. And so he heated this up. She set out some dip, some guac, some salsa, the green and the red. You see, and she poured a little bit of wine. Hey, and that amazing, well-versed traveler picked up the bread, and he said a little prayer. Now he's in their house and he's doing this. He tore off a couple of pieces and he handed it to them. Now verse 31. At that instant, two things happened simultaneously. Their eyes are suddenly opened. So they recognize him, and he instantly vanishes. He just disappears before their eyes. They're like, what? He's like, what? And she's like, I told you so. No woman would say that, I'm sure. Never been happening. That might have been the first time. You see, they realized what had just happened. Actually, Mary had already seen the resurrected Christ earlier that day. It was a surprise to her when he might have changed forms again. That might have been why their eyes were opened. I don't know. But Cleopas realized it, and she realized it. You see, her husband finally believed her and finally believed in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now they got to go back to Jerusalem to tell the others. Wouldn't you have? Wouldn't you? Sure you would. Jesus' plan is beginning to work. Now, number 4 resurrection realization, Peter. Now, Cleopas and Mary dash back the 7 miles to Jerusalem. It probably wasn't going to take them 2 hours this time, you see. And they go to the place where they head toward the place where the apostles are staying. They walk in, and before they can say anything, they were excited. Wouldn't you be? If he had told you every scripture in the whole Bible about him, and he quoted it from memory, I mean, this guy was amazing. And then they realize it was the resurrected Christ, and then he vanishes in front of their eyes. It's like, what? So they hightail it back to Jerusalem. Now, while that happened, Jesus had this little meeting with this guy named Peter. And so in verse 24, verse 30, Luke 24:34, before Cleopas and his companion can tell their story, the others have their own story to tell. Other disciples. The Lord has indeed risen. It is true. He appeared to Simon. See, now they're know-it-alls. Simon, he appeared to Simon. He's probably really gone up, probably. You'll see why I say that in a minute. Peter was standing there with a befuddled and puzzled look on his face. Even after seeing Jesus alive, he still wasn't sure what he saw. And you're going to see later that a few of the apostles still don't believe, even after all this. They still don't believe. What does it take to believe that Christ rose from the dead? Number 5, resurrection realization. The 11, Judas is present, Thomas is absent. Now this realization basically blew my mind. Watch the depth of forgiveness with which we can live. This is something that I didn't even realize until a couple of days ago. Luke 24:25. Then the two men report their own experience. Shouldn't say men. Everybody thinks it's two men, but the two people. And their conversation along the road. And their moment of realization and recognition as he broke the bread. At that very instant, as they were still telling the story, Jesus is there, standing among them. Now, while Cleopas and Mary told their story of spending 2 hours with the risen Christ, Jesus appears in that room. Now, the emotions were high enough, at that time. And the book of John says that they were afraid. That's why they were behind closed doors. They were afraid for their lives. You see, now Jesus, he appears, and here's what he says. May you have peace. You might expect them to be overjoyed, but they aren't. 37. They're startled and terrified. They think they're seeing a ghost. They scream like little schoolgirls. Imagine these apostles, these guys who are tough fishermen, and guys who were raised out of doors. They see this thing and they scream. At first I didn't really understand it. Now they've done it before. Remember when he walked on the water? They screamed. So it must not be unusual for men of that day and time to scream. Well, this time Jesus looked a little bit like he did when he was crucified. So that may be a little more horrific. Okay? He's standing there, be at peace. Yet he has holes in his side, holes in his hands, and holes in his feet. I don't know if he was all bloody or not, because it doesn't say. You see, so let me see. Okay, this time Jesus appears looking a little bit like he did at that crucifixion. Now I might scream too. I might scream too. I might have that shocked effect, I'm sure they jerk back, when all of a sudden he appeared, boing, and looking like he did. Just appearing's one thing, but looking a little bit like he did when you're hanging on that tree, that's a whole nother thing. Old Cleopas and Mary had seen him with his traveling clothes on and suitcase, but they didn't see him like this. They did not see the Christ. Now he's in another fashion. Okay? 38. He's pulling out all the stops, folks, trying to get them to just believe that he rose from the dead. What is it going to take? These apostles had to believe it. They had to, because he was going to ascend and he knew it. His time was limited. He had 40 days to do this work. But this is still the first day. Okay? This is day 1. Okay? And so 38. Why are you so upset? Jesus said. Why are your hearts churning with questions? Look my hands and my feet. See that it's me. Come on, touch me. See for yourself. A ghost doesn't have flesh and bones as you can see that I have. So I wonder if his bones were showing. You know, like they did when he was hanging on that tree. I don't know. You see, then he shows them his hands and his feet. Now their fear gives way to joy. But it seems too good to be true. They're still unsure. Then Jesus said, do you have anything here to eat? Just like a young man though, right? Just like a young man. You see, didn't he just have a meal, a couple of hours ago? Or maybe he didn't eat, right? He just said he tore, handed it to him, and he disappeared. This guy's hungry. He's hungry. He hasn't eaten in now 4 days, 5 days, whatever it is. Now look at the additional info given in the book of John, chapter 20, verse 22. And when he had said this, he breathed on them and saith unto them, receive ye the Holy Ghost. Whosoever sins ye remit, they are remitted unto them. And whosoever sins ye retain, they are retained. But Thomas, one of the 12, called Didymus, was not with them when Jesus came. So if there's 11 apostles, and Thomas, who was one of the apostles, isn't there, who had to have been there? Judas. Now just think about that. That means Judas had to have been there all the times these women came through there, telling these stories. When Peter had gone and said that, the tomb was open. Jesus then instructs the 11 present apostles one step on how at some point they were going to receive Holy Spirit. He breathed. He breathed in deeply. Next, he talks about forgiveness. Now, we each have the choice to hang on to our errors of the past or to release them. Aren't people's things they did in the past, isn't that what drives them crazy later in life? Yeah. Okay. It's our choice how we think. If we're going to hang on to our sins, hang on to our failures, hang on to our misdeeds, or we're going to release it. Who's sitting there? Who's sitting there? Judas. Who's in that room? Who's most in need of forgiveness of any of them? Judas. It says the 11 apostles were there. Thomas was not with them, which means Judas was there. After all he did, after betraying the Christ, selling him out for 30 pieces of silver, you think he felt a little funny sitting there? What kind of vibes would be coming from the other apostles? You ever been in a room of people who didn't trust you? You think it was an uncomfortable place for him to sit? Yet look what Jesus does. He gives him a way out. Jesus gives him a way out. Plus, Jesus instructed them how to get born again on what will someday be the day of Pentecost. And Judas was there. So could it have been possible for Judas to have gotten born again? Yes. Yes. Is that love? That's our Savior. That's the lesson on this fifth one right here. What does number 5 mean in the Bible? Grace. What is grace? Divine favor. Isn't that something? What a lesson on practical forgiveness. Folks, this is not easy to do. It wasn't just pointed at Judas, it was pointed at the other apostles, because if this guy did change his mind, they would have to change their minds too. Is that hard to do? Forgiveness is hard, folks. You see, that was the 5th and final appearance that day, on that day. But some still didn't believe he rose from the dead, and I'll prove that in just a second. 5 is for grace. We need grace. Forgiveness is grace in action. Now number 6, resurrection realization. This is the 11. This time Thomas is present and Judas is absent. 8 days pass. A week and 1 day. Must have been a Monday then, I guess. And the disciples are still in a house. Now, I don't know if they were in Jerusalem or if they were in Galilee at this time, but they were in a house. And, so maybe they did what Jesus said to go to Galilee. Maybe they stayed in that same place because they were freaked out a little bit. Okay? And once again, Jesus appears in that room, and this time Thomas was there and Judas wasn't. Judas had probably gone out and committed suicide. Okay? Now, just for you who don't know, how he would have done it is he would have planted a spike in the ground and he would have dove on it. And that was how they hung themselves at that day and time. They didn't hang themselves by a rope. They hung themselves on a spike, like a soldier might fall on his sword. And then your bowels gush out. And that's what happened to Judas. Okay? And we don't know exactly what time. Probably it happened in that 8-day span sometime. Imagine the condemnation, especially after Jesus offered forgiveness. He couldn't let go of it. And Jesus told him, you hang on to it. You're hanging on to it forever. You see? Let it go, and it's let go forever. I think it's a good lesson for us to let go of the things we've done wrong. You know. So Jesus appears in that room. You know, Thomas is there. Remember Thomas had thrown a tizzy fit? We didn't read the whole record, but he threw a fit. Well, I'm not going to believe. I'll never believe unless I can thrust my hand into his side. You know, this is what he said. You know, and I can touch the nail prints in his hands. And so Thomas. So 8 days later, he's in this room, and what happens? You know, I mean, he'd thrown this fit. He's in this room. They're just eating another meal together, probably. You know, and remember, he said he wasn't going to believe. He wanted to touch those man-made holes in Jesus' body. You see? And John 20, verse 26. And after 8 days again, his disciples were within, and Thomas with them. Then came Jesus, the doors being shut, and stood in the midst and said, Peace be unto you. Then said he to Thomas, Reach hither thy finger, and behold my hands. And reach thither thy hand, and thrust it into my side. And be not faithless, but believing. So he said, he knew what Thomas had said. Thomas said, because unless I can shove my hand into that hole in his side, I ain't going to believe. So Jesus said, here it is, dude. Shove it in. Ain't going to hurt me any. I got a pretty cool body here. So now he's in that body that sort of looked like it did the last time, okay? And Jesus gave Thomas and the crew, I'm going to need to back up for a second. Now Jesus then says, he says, Thomas, because thou hast seen me, thou hast believed. Blessed are they that have not seen and yet have believed. None of you have seen him. None of you have seen him, yet you believed. You're blessed. You're blessed. Jesus gave Thomas and the crew the chance to believe. He gave them a chance to believe. See, we got to give ourselves the opportunity to believe so we can get to and reach any goal. Remember, if you set a goal, it's something you don't have. It's something you can see in your mind, but you don't see in front of you, right? That's what he had to get them to. He'd been teaching believing the whole time. Believe in your heart that God raised Jesus from the dead and make him Lord, right? Isn't that Romans 10:9 and 10:9? You see? Give yourself the opportunity to believe. Number 7, resurrection realization. The 11 on a mountain near Galilee. This 7th resurrection realization sort of shocked me. And this is the 3rd time he had appeared to the 11, or to 11 of the apostles. And this time he meets with them at the exact location that he had appointed them and commissioned them and ordained them in a sense. They were in Galilee and they're on a mountainside. They were not in a house this time. This is where he had appointed the apostles a year before. Think it'd be a special place in their memory? When the whole thing started? You know how before a trip you're all excited about that trip. And it's fun after you get back, but that anticipation is really something. This was a place of one of their greatest exciting moments of their life. Matthew 28:16. And then the 11 disciples went away into Galilee, into a mountain where Jesus had appointed them. And when they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. But some doubted. After all that, Peter had seen him at least 4 times by now. The other ones had seen him at least 3 times in a resurrected body, yet some still doubted. What does it take to believe that somebody is raised from the dead? What does it take to believe? See, some doubted. What was it going to take? Jesus was running out of time. He had to get these guys to believe that he had in fact risen from the dead. And some, after seeing him at least three times or so in his resurrected body, still did not believe what they saw. Now, to me, that's just baffling. But I wonder if I would be the same. I don't know. I just don't know. How hard-headed and hard-hearted are we? These were some of the meekest guys in Israel. Yet some of the apostles doubted. You know, they were at that special, beautiful outdoor spot where they had 1 short year ago been appointed by Jesus as an apostle, his faithful of the faithful, his personal messengers. Jesus really needed these 11. He really, really, really needed these guys to get it. He really, really needed them to believe that he rose from the dead, but some didn't. What was it going to take? Number 8, resurrection realization. Fishers 7. Now, Peter had gone back into his fishing business when he's in Galilee. I'm in Galilee, might as well go back to work, earn a few bucks now. Jesus is gone. Now, it's just baffling, you see. So he goes back into his fishing business, and 6 others went with him. That's over half the apostles that Peter was taking down with him. Jesus had instructed them to tarry in Jerusalem. That was another instruction. I'm going to meet you in Galilee, but I want you to go to Jerusalem. That's where I want you to end up. I want you to hang out in Jerusalem. And I want you to wait there until you're filled with power from on high. Yet they remained at home in Galilee. Luke 24:49. What was it going to take? Jesus has a heart-to-heart with Peter. He gets out of the boat. You see, Jesus had cooked them fish. They hadn't caught anything all night. You see, Jesus had fish and bread cooking on a little fire there. And they remember that's when he jumped into the water naked, you know, and ran over to Jesus. Well, now Peter, he's walking with Jesus. I'm sure he has some clothes on now, you see, and he's walking with Jesus along the shore there alone. And 3 times Peter asked him, Jesus asked Peter 3 times, hey, do you love me, man? Now, what's going on here? Do you really love me? Hey, I'm talking to you, Peter. Do you love me? We've been through a lot, man. And then he says, if you love me, I need you to go feed the sheep, man. I need you to feed the lambs. I need you to feed the sheep. I need you to take care of my people. That's the whole point of my life, Peter. Well, you know, Peter and the guys did go back to Jerusalem. And they did wait. See, number 8 means what in the Bible? New beginning. This was a new beginning. Now, number 9 is resurrection realization, is the ascension. Now, number 9 is huge. Number 9 in the Bible symbolizes divine completeness or finality. It's associated with fruitfulness, like the fruit of the Spirit and the 9 parts of the manifestation of Holy Spirit. 9's a cool number, okay? And believing in the resurrection will get you born again, but understanding what happened after the ascension gets you walking with power. So, you know, I'm not going to take the time to read all this, but you could read Luke 24 at the end there. And so, you know, they've, you know, like in verse 49, Jesus said, so I'm sending my Father's promise to you. Stay in the city until you receive it, until power from heaven comes upon you. Then he leads them out of Bethany, and he lifts up his hands and blesses them. And at that moment, with his hands raised in blessing, probably wiping that last bit of sweat off of his brow, you know, because he accomplished his task this time, he leaves them, and he's carried up into heaven. These guys finally got it. They finally believed. But it took all the way up to the ascension for these guys to get it. Then they see him floating up into the sky. Now, how crazy would that be for people of that day and time? They worship him. Then they return to Jerusalem and they're filled with intense joy. See, they were near Bethany and they returned again and again to the temple to celebrate God. Then you could read Acts chapter 1 and you're gonna see how he showed himself for 40 days. And he taught them things pertaining to the kingdom of heaven. And they assembled together. I mean, look at all the things that Jesus did to get them to believe. You see? And then it goes on. Let me see. Then there was 3 more times that he appeared. And I'm not going to go into them. There's 10, 11, 12. And these are all they're talked about by the Apostle Paul from 1 Corinthians 15. And it talks about that Jesus appeared to 500 people at one time. And we don't know the timing of that. Was it before the ascension or after? I don't know. And it talks about he appeared to his half-brother James. When? We don't know. And then Paul said, last of all, the last resurrection appearance was to me. Paul. And that was when he was on the road to Damascus, when he was going to kill some more Christians. And he got converted. So look at all it took to get 11 men to realize that he had been raised from the dead. The resurrection of Jesus Christ changed history. The resurrection of Jesus Christ changed our life, but it's believing in it that allows us to walk with power. It's believing in it that allows us to spread the word. You see, the resurrection would be a waste if no one believed that he rose from the dead. So let's believe. Let's believe. Let's tell other people that he rose from the dead. And those are the 12 resurrection realizations. God bless you all.